Speed cameras have been introduced this week 24/7 onto the UK's busiest motorway. But do they make us safer? There are two theories, two schools of thought on this. The first is when you're driving in speed camera country, you are worried about getting a fine and therefore you reduce your speed. And if you reduce your speed, then there are fewer accidents. The other theory is that you're constantly looking at your speedometer. If you're looking at your speedometer, you're not concentrating on the road, and therefore accidents are more likely. Now, the data on these worldwide is mixed. There have been studies in the United Kingdom that suggest that speed cameras do actually reduce accidents. What we're looking at today is how we could tell whether or not speed cameras were working. And by working, what we mean is reducing people's speed. Now, to do this, we're going to use the scientific method, and the scientific method involves comparing two or more situations, and those situations should be as identical as possible with just one change. So the first situation is a stretch of road with a speed camera, and we are going to count the number of cars going past that are going over the speed limit. Now, our second situation could be the exact same stretch of road with no speed camera, and then again we count the number of cars going past that are going over the speed limit. Perhaps a better second situation would be where we've got the same stretch of road but there's a sign up saying no speeding. So an attempt to reduce people's speed without actually using a speed camera. Or what we could do is all three. Let's say that we're going to go with a stretch of road with a speed camera and without a speed camera. And we count 100 cars going past in each situation. Now, it doesn't have to be 100 and it doesn't have to be the same number of cars in each situation, but for convenience, that's what we're going to do. And we get these data. So when we don't have a speed camera, we find 42 out of 100 cars going over the speed limit. And when we do have a speed camera, we find 37 cars out of 100 that are going over the speed limit. Now, to test whether or not the speed camera has actually had an impact, what we have to do is we have to decide whether or not these two sets of results could come from the same thing. Now, when we say thing, what do we mean? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to program a coin that when we toss it, it will come up heads 42 times out of 100 and tails the remainder of the time. And that is our thing, that is our situation. It's called a distribution. And heads is going to represent when we've got a car going over the speed limit, and tails when we've got a car going under the speed limit. Now, the next thing we have to do is decide what sort of a difference we are looking for. So in this case, we have found a reduction of 5%. Is that good enough? Do we maybe want a reduction of 6% or 7% or maybe 1%? That's a subjective decision. And all sorts of things will feed into that decision. The cost of the speed cameras, the amount of revenue that's going to be generated in fines, the amount of anger that is going to be caused among road users. All of these things will determine whether or not we are interested in a reduction of 1%, 5%, 6%, whatever. But let's say that we decide that we are looking for a reduction of 5%, which is exactly what we've got in this instance. What we will do is we will take our coin and we will toss it 100 times. So we toss the coin 100 times and we count how many cars we have going over the speed limit. And that is one run. And if we have 37 or fewer cars, we make a note of that. We count that as one. And then we do that whole thing over and over and over again. So let's say we do it 1,000 times. Now, this is going to be done inside a computer, so 1,000 times will only take a split second. We count the number of times. Out of 1,000, we get 37 or fewer cars going over the speed limit. So let's say that, for the sake of argument and to keep it simple, we find 37 or fewer 100 times out of 1,000. In other words, 10%. So 10% of the time, our coin toss, the thing that we are testing, has given us these data. 10% of the time, these two data sets, these two results, could come from the same coin, and 90% of the time, it looks like they come from different situations, different coins, if you like, different things. So 90% of the time, it looks like our speed camera has had an impact, and 10% of the time, it looks like our results are just chance. Is 90% good enough? Well, we might decide that people's lives are on the line here and that 90% is more than good enough. Now, most journals would be looking for 95 or higher, but we're not talking about publishing this in a journal, we're just talking about reducing speed, and therefore 90% might be good enough. So if we find that, we might say that speed cameras have had an impact. And that is one way that we might decide whether or not speed cameras are having an impact.